a sight for my soul.
Welcome to the Inspired Evolution, and it is an adventurous treat to be here today. We've got with us Jason Moore. Jason, how are you, brother?
I'm good, man. I'm fantastic. Actually, recording a podcast first thing in the mornings is one of my favorite things to do. So thanks for the invitation, man.
Bro, it is such a pleasure to have you here. For those tuning into Jason for the first time, I can't believe it's your first time because this guy's been a lot of places and he's been everywhere almost, I feel. His travel lifestyle's taken many forms over the last 20 years, right? He's drove around the USA in a giant orange tabby cat shaped van. He worked as a tour manager for a famous indie rock band, spent a decade working as a digital nomad with various businesses. And somehow he's found roots in beautiful Oslo in Norway. And he's directed his entrepreneurial life now to helping others achieve their travel and location independent career dreams. He's done this through his podcast, which if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's lots of fun. It's got his vibe all over it. Zero to Travel is the name of the podcast. And he's got the Location Indie Community and the Lifestyle Launch Academy. Dude, thank you so much for doing this. It is such a pleasure. There are so many places we could dive into this podcast, but let's just dive off where we were, pick up where we were left off before we, decided to press record effectively. Dude, podcasting changed your life. It's completely changed mine. Can we just talk about it for a quick sec? You said it was up there with kind of like up there, probably behind the birth of your kids, but relatively up there in terms of, I know I'm going to say that.
No, definitely. But yeah, I mean, if you have to rank these things, and you're thinking about your life, you're thinking about the things that have changed your life the most when you reflect back. Sometimes those things in real time, you can't necessarily identify them. I mean, when I started the podcast, it was an exciting thing, but I didn't know it was going to change my life forever.
The power of it.
Ways. Yeah. It's crazy, man. So it's just such a beautiful thing nowadays that you can buy a $100 microphone, which I have here. I think it was $75. Plug it in to the right things, hit record, have a conversation, share it with the world, and it can help people out there that are listening. And it certainly helped me as a podcast listener. I've always been attracted to audio, and selfishly on the hosting side, I get to have wonderful conversations with people like yourself, get to learn all kinds of new perspectives, get to learn about, what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes that, I always say you can only have the one life that you have, right? So with podcasting, you almost get to vicariously kind of walk in somebody's shoes for a little bit and put yourself there and just learn from them. And it's such a beautiful exchange and such an awesome medium to be able to share those conversations. So I really, really love it.
Yeah, and I love what you're describing there in terms of the way you describe that in terms of vicariously walking in other people's shoes. Because oftentimes I find now we've been doing this for quite a few years, and you'll find that sometimes even having interviewed so many people on the same sort of topics, after a while, you've even end up with like conflicting theories sometimes. But it's actually kind of epic because you sort of feel your mind and your sort of yourself growing, because it's like, actually that person's right for their situation, this person's also right, but also they're conflicting in said places, and I can sort of see that's like I'm actually holding more space in my head for opposing ideas than I was before. Like, shit, I think it's making me smarter.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've been trying to get my head around a bit more recently is that idea of duality, right? Yeah, it's not one or the other. Most times when you think about it, you can hold two different concepts in your head, and it's maybe tricky to live by them in certain ways, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think, those conversations, that what you're alluding to is something that I experience as well. We're talking a lot about travel, and sometimes there are similar things that come up. People were, disillusioned with their 9-to-5 job. They quit, they travel, and there's all that stuff. But when you start to unpack it and dig into the human experience of what that is for them, and then start to uncover their perspectives and what led them to those decisions and the path that they're on, and how they ended up there, and where the path's taking them, and all of the magical things that happen along the way. Yeah, you're right. You're exposed to conflicting things. And I think that's a good thing, because one of the most important things we need to do, at least in my belief, is to constantly question your own beliefs. Otherwise, you can end up, you can say you're open-minded, but if you're not questioning your beliefs all the time and changing them and adjusting them, are you really?
Yeah, I love that. And that actually, I'm going to use that as a bit of a segue because we can still riff about podcasting, we probably will. But the one of the things that I fell in love with early on in traveling, so I grew up, I had this really amazing opportunity. I had an Indian family, I was an only kid, and most of my family was in India. So every couple of years, my parents would just like handballing me back across the Indian Ocean to go hang out with my grandparents and my family and stuff. And
Amazing.
so, but the belief systems that you were talking about that were challenged through holding opposing ideas, I found a lot of that in traveling as well. Early days, like I remember seeing just how the value of life was very different growing up in Australia versus growing up in India. There was extreme poverty in places in India, and just the classism was just such a different sort of structure in India as it was like this abundant middle class in Australia. And it was like so many things that I could see. Like, I'll give you the easy example, right? Like, my cousins would be walking down the street, and this is like me as like a young teenager, and they'd want to hold my hand. And I was like, no, dude, like, I don't love you. Like, stop it. Like,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? And they're like, what do you
Yeah.
mean love you? Like, you're my brother. Like, you're my cousin. Just hold my hand and we'll go to the shops. And I'm like, I'm not holding your hand, bro. Like, this is not happening. And then I started realizing it's like, oh my God, like I've got these limiting beliefs that me holding my cousin's hand literally must mean that I'm in a romantic relationship with him
Right.
and nothing else, because that's what the cultural beliefs from where I'm from indicate.
Yeah.
And so this whole trip around, like before there was personal development in my life, I feel like traveling encourages you to grow so much in the adventure. And I really wanted to sort of pick apart some of that with you in terms of, yeah, just how we identify certain parts of ourselves on the adventure that we never would have found while we were at home.
Oh yeah. Thanks for sharing that example. That makes total sense. It's there's so much cultural. I guess there are so many cultural inputs that we're not even aware of, and for me, that's a big thing that travel has done. Of course, now I live abroad. I live in Norway, so it continues on, I suppose, right? Living in another country, but the further you are away from your own culture, physically, obviously having that distance, where you can't just kind of escape back into it makes it a big difference, because you're forced into other cultural situations. You start to pick up on other cultural nuances and beliefs. And when you just have distance from anything, I think it gives you a chance to reflect, right? If you think about somebody that's, deciding if they're going to quit when we were talking earlier, when you were deciding if you're going to quit your job and kind of going on that whole journey, I'm sure you were giving yourself space to reflect. Maybe it was mental space. And travel, it's almost like forced reflection, forced minimalism, forced a lot of things. You're just thrown out into the world, and there it is. And you start to realize, oh, yeah, the way I grew up and the way we have done things is just one way in a giant world. And it's not what everybody does. It's not the way everybody thinks. And you start to, again, question your beliefs and start to think differently, right? And that's just what it does. Now it happens, I think like travel can be in some ways, at least for me, it's almost like accelerated self-development.
Yeah.
Right. I could sit back at home and read the books and all that, but throwing yourself out into the world, man, you can learn a lot in a short amount of time.
Yeah, totally. And you interface so much with yourself. Like I remember even one example that I find myself reflecting on early days, which taught me a lot about myself and traveling, was like I remember being in a backpacker, and there was these 4 German guys that were like literally, I could see they were going out on the town, and I knew I could be their token Aussie. Like I just knew it. I was like, I could be their token Aussie. They're German. They're gonna love me. I could go out.
There's always a token Aussie,
right? So I was like, we could totally do this. And then every cell in my body wanted to ask, hey, you guys going out? Can I hit the town with you? And this is like, and I didn't. I remember so clearly end up back in the hostel room, sitting upstairs with my book in my hand, head buried in a book, and not really reading, just regretting like what could have
Uh,
been the night out.
yeah.
And I remember just going, man, like just a little bit of courage would have completely changed my trajectory of my night. I could have made friends. And it was interesting because back home, everybody knew me as the extrovert and kind of like the bubbly guy, and it's all good. And like, no one would imagine that Amrit would have the troubles of kind of going, hey, like I'm too shy to ask. And I
Yeah.
remember like just the opportunity of, and this is what I was alluding to, is like we like almost because we get so conditioned to who we are in our environment that somehow it doesn't make as much sense to the head that you'd actually find parts of yourself out
Yeah.
on the road, but you
Yeah.
really do. And it's like, oh, I found that part of myself. And actually, I can work with that part of myself on the road. I never would have had the opportunity to work with it while I was at home. Right.
Did you, were you traveling solo or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What was that experience like for you?
Traveling solo has been always a really special experience because it does feel like it's like much more personal development oriented. Not that the intention is I'm going to travel on my own and I'm going to grow myself, but I just find even just when it comes to language barriers and stuff, like how I find myself communicating, navigating through situations. Yeah, it's I really enjoy it. But I like introspection. I'm a meditator. I kind of like that sort of stuff. But then there's
Yeah.
also something when I travel, and that's where, this might sound a bit loaded, especially for those that are listening and that don't have a relationship, but traveling with your partner is probably, in my experience, like the sweet spot. Traveling with your friends is also great, but then don't go for too long. I've had to find for traveling with your partner, you've got someone you can share experiences with, and hopefully you've got enough space to sort of give each other time to go do what you want to do as well, and you get the best of all worlds. But yeah, why do you ask?
Well, because solo travel was something that changed my life. That was
Yeah.
another a defining moment. We talked about podcasting, and also for me, my first trip overseas, proper trip, not spring break in Cancun,
Yeah. Where
Mexico, in
did you
high
go?
school, was the traditional backpacking journey through Europe, where
Yeah.
you get on the Eurail thing, and man, that was I didn't know anybody who had traveled solo. This was in the late 90s.
Mm.
So I'm dating myself here. But, at that time, there weren't all the blogs and the podcasts and the things that I didn't know anybody that did this. And there was nowhere to read about anybody that did this that I
Just
knew
to
of.
just to put this into context for the listener, there was no picking up a sim at the local wherever and having a GPS on your phone and knowing where you were going, right? That was
No.
that was still
Paper
like a decade
maps,
away,
asking people. I always tell people that's a travel tip. Don't ask Google, ask people.
Yeah,
You
I
get a
love
lot
that.
more interesting interactions. But yeah, so that changed my life forever. And I think one of the things that you were talking about when you were sharing some of your story is the idea of going out and finding yourself through your travels, right? Like the self-development part. And I think I think that that's too heavy of an intention to put on any trip,
Yeah,
right?
of
It's like,
course.
well, what if you don't find yourself, whatever that means, and how do you even define that, right? So they say expectation is the thief of joy, and that's why I think when you travel, it's good to just kind of dive in and have the experience and take it for what it is, right? Like what you described in the hostel, going back and burying your head in the book and all that. That was part of the experience for some reason. And maybe having that experience led you to, being a lot more extroverted in your future travels and a lot of other amazing things. And hey, maybe those guys went out and got mugged that night, who knows? But it's all part of the experience. And that part of it for you was it sounds like a part of your growth process, right? Like if you hadn't gone through that, you wouldn't have kind of had those thoughts and reflected on that in the same way. So it's just all part of the experience. And solo travel is quite an experience in terms of, meeting people, being out in the world, learning that you are resourceful as an individual and you can figure things out, which is super empowering. And yeah, just having the courage to kind of get out there without anybody having to handle all decisions yourself. There's a lot that comes with solo travel, going through the lonely times, because you will get
Yeah.
lonely if you do it long enough, having the highs and the lows and everything like that. It's a beautiful experience. So I recommend solo travel to everybody. And if you're the one listening, you're like, well, I couldn't do that. Or, I don't want to eat in a restaurant by myself. It feels weird. I don't want to go to the movies by myself, whatever. Well, that's kind of the point, right? You do it because it things might feel weird, or, that's kind of where you get out of your comfort zone. And then you start to discover things. You still might not like going to dinner by yourself at the end, but maybe the thing becomes that you can now sit there and do it comfortably. And there's something in that.
Yeah. Is this just my projection on, because I'm getting older, or is there more fear around traveling now than there was when, potentially, like, I'll put it this way, I was 6 and then 8 and then 9 when my parents just literally dropped me off at the Adelaide airport and put me in the custody of Singapore assisted care. And then someone picked me up in India at New Delhi airport, which was my cousin, which was my parents' family. And there was that was just so easy. Like, it was so doable. And I had a wild time because I was just like this little kid sitting in first class because they couldn't be bothered putting me out the back, eating all these meals. It was a great experience. But I'm just wondering, are people as open to that these days? And I kind of feel like in my gut that we're not as open to such experiences, and there is more fear about where people travel. Or is that just a paradigm that I'm plugged into because you speak to so many people about travel? Is there more or less fear around travel these days?
I think that it depends, is the answer to that question, of course, because going back to what you said, or what we talked about in the beginning around the culture that you come from, right? So, what are the messages that you're bombarded with from your inner circle? If you come from, maybe like, I don't want to stereotype here, but I'll just say, like a conservative Midwestern US family that hasn't traveled anywhere, and maybe your parents see the world as like the most, the world outside of your town as the most dangerous place, and you should never go anywhere or do anything. Well, if you're bombarded with that for 2 decades, and now you're 20 years old and you want to travel, you're probably going to be afraid. Right. And then you pile onto that the media bubbles that we are in, and the stuff that we read, and that the news is reported in a certain way to get clicks, and it's a business, and good news isn't the thing that sells the newspapers, right? So there are all these factors that combine to coalesce into fear in many ways, right? So then I think it's just a matter of taking in the right information, the right brain food around travel, and understanding that when you listen to Zero to Travel podcast, for example, or I'm sure you've talked about travel on your podcast, you hear time and again that people say, well, the world's this, amazing place, and people are good, and all of these stories that you hear where strangers are helping people out and taking them in, and all this stuff. It's like, well, people aren't making this up, right? There's something to that. So, paying attention to those things, I think, is important. And then, getting over your fear by just diving in and doing it. I think that's how psychologists conquer like a fear of snakes, for example. There's 2 different ways. I can't remember the scientific term for this technique, but they either like slowly expose the person to the snake, right? Like first you're sitting in the room with the snake, but it's in a cage, like far away. And the next day it's like a little closer, and then maybe it comes out, but somebody's holding it across the room, and you get closer and closer. And then there's the, hey, we're going to put a snake around your neck, and, and travel's kind of like the snake around your neck, right? Like you buy the plane ticket and you get off the plane, and there you are, with the taxi drivers haggling with you, and, the things. So, if you want to do it and your heart's calling you to travel at some point, despite the fears, and, even seasoned travelers, I mean, you go to a new place, I don't know how you feel, but there's always a bit of anxiety and fear. Like, you don't know what's going on. You're tired when you arrive, you're jet lagged. It's a new country. There are people that can scam you and things like that, like everywhere. You don't know the neighborhood. So there's a lot to figure out each time. So it's not like, yes, you can get more comfortable with that as you get experience, but it doesn't always completely go away depending on where you're going and things like that. So, but yeah, to answer your question, that was the long, maybe rambling philosophical thing on fear,
Perfect, bro.
but I say quasi philosophical maybe, but I think I don't know. I don't know if it's any more if there's any more fear around it than there has always been. It's just the fear is coming from maybe some new places, some different places, and it's really dependent on the individual. But our job, I think, as individuals is to get over our fear, right? Like if we want to do anything in life that is probably meaningful or purposeful, we probably have to act in spite of our fears at some point. I don't think I've met anybody that's done some cool things that, hasn't had to kick their fear in the butt.
Yeah,
to do it.
walk head first into it, right? And that was going to be
Yeah.
one of my questions, bro, because your journey is how was your relationship with fear at your journey? Because you, from what I have gathered, pretty much were left college, were in debt, and just were like, you know what, fuck this, I'm out. Was there some fear around there, or was it just inspired to sort of move? How is your
Oh
journey?
yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know what the heck I was doing when I got
Yeah.
out of college. I knew I had all this debt. I had $20,000 in student debt. I had to pay it off. I studied communications, something. I guess I should do something with this degree. I don't know. Should I rent an apartment and live somewhere and get a job? I was applying for all these jobs. I didn't know what I was doing. One thing I did know I really wanted to do was take this trip to Europe. And originally I wanted to do it with a friend. But I had graduated in December and my friend wasn't graduating until, no, he had actually already graduated and then he had gotten a job right away. So I was like, all right, well, I'm here at home. And when you graduate in the middle of the year, it's a weird time because some of your friends are already graduated and they've gotten jobs. So they've moved on. And the other ones from
Waiting to
college
graduate.
are,
Yeah, still.
or they're still in school and you're just kind of there on your mom's couch eating potato chips. Well, I was anyway. So watching Comedy Central and wondering what to do with your life.
Love it.
So it was a crazy time, but I was fortunate in that I did commit to the trip and to travel. And what that did is changed my approach to everything. Right. And I think the point I want to make here is that when you really truly commit to something, you just see the world differently and it allows you to take different actions, and those different actions tend to lead to the result that you want. Right. And for me, those specific actions were, okay, committing to this trip. Now I've turned down this full-time job I got offered because I know I want to take this backpacking trip. Okay, well, I'm doing this. So now what do I need to do to save money? All right, well, maybe I'll get a job at a restaurant or something, like a temporary job for 6 months and just save money and go. Okay. Oh, well, maybe I should look for some jobs that are travel jobs that allow me to travel and get paid. And that started happening. And somehow I stumbled across this random job where there was a charity event that traveled to different states all across the US. And I didn't know anything about this industry. They sent me a tour schedule. I was like, tour schedule, cool. And there was a charity event where kids raced modified lawn tractors with the blades removed around a Kmart parking lot.
I'm glad the blades were removed.
Yes, the blades were removed. And I was like, what is this? This is so odd. And I had an interview with a guy who was visiting a golf cart factory in New Jersey because they were thinking about switching from tractors to golf carts. And I'm like, this is the strangest job interview I've ever. I'm like standing in a parking lot with this guy smoking a cigarette and basically BSing with me. And I'm standing there with my leather bound, folder and my resume dressed up. And basically gave me the job. And then I went on this tour and then I fell into the event marketing industry and started doing all these tours. And then I took the trip and that just kept me on the road and kept leading to life travel. So I became a touring professional for a decade, didn't live anywhere because I didn't want to. And This is before being a nomad was cool, I guess.
Yeah, that was you gonna say. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was just really, honestly, like it wasn't any messaging like, oh, I want to be a nomad because that's like such a cool life. It was more just like, hey, I love this travel thing and I'm
It
just going to
felt
keep
right.
doing it because why would I stop?
Yeah.
And so I kept getting gigs and then traveling overseas in between my contracts. And it just ended up that it happened for 10 years because I loved it and didn't want it to stop. So
I've got to ask you this question because everybody asked me. Yeah, what are some of your favorite? Like, I want to ask you what's your favorite place, but I know that's such a bullshit question because it's so hard to have like one favorite. But when you think back, is like I'm sure Oslo is pretty special because you've decided to put down some roots there. But what's yeah, what is up there with like your favorite places that you've been to?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, because I spent a decade of my life road tripping around the USA, my home country, after traveling all over the world, even one of my all-time favorite travel things to do is a good old-fashioned road trip anywhere in the States, getting in the car, cruising, stopping and getting milkshakes along the way. Maybe that's just me. Camping, doing whatever. There's just so many adventures to be had. And then I really loved traveling through Argentina. Spent after touring for many years, wanted to have a summer off, and it's in summer there is in the winter in the US. So went down to Patagonia and spent 3 months there, 3.5 months, and mostly on the Argentinian side, and just such a lovely, beautiful nature, amazing people. It's too many adventures to share on this podcast. And Nepal, which I finally got to go to in I don't remember, it was 2012, 2013. I'm terrible with years. It was the year, I think, after the earthquake that happened there, the tragedy. But again, lovely people, beautiful mountains, trekking. It was always a dream come true to go there. So when I'll never forget sitting in a temple with some of these Buddhist monks who were making yak milk tea. And it looked like a Disney set for Indiana Jones. Like you walked in and it wasn't like a guided, like we had just met these monks and they invited us in, and it wasn't like a thing where tourists were, they were bringing the tourist groups through. And it just, as soon as I walked, I was like, this is like an Indiana Jones
stage.
This is like a stage set, but it's real life. Like now I can see like these stage sets were built on real life, Of course they were. So just, having experiences like that, and just being able to be connected to the land and people, different types of people all over the world in that way was just awesome.
I gotta ask you.
It's hard to put into words,
Yeah, no, I totally.
You get these questions, and then everybody can relate to this, right? You just get you get a montage of images in your head,
and all the feelings are coming through as well with them, and you're gonna try and put some words to them.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, is my job as a podcaster, I guess, but not always easy.
Come on, man. No, I'm kidding.
I want to step up your game.
So I would never say that. So USA, Argentina, Nepal. This is a question.
And Europe.
And some of my own reflections. Are you the same person in every country when you visit it?
Well, that's a great question. I'm gonna have to steal that one and ask it on my podcast. Yes and no. This is something I've been talking about pretty recently. And when I say no, it doesn't mean that you're a fake person. I think there are some adjustments. There are some cultural adjustments that need to be made to, fit in some ways, or to be, I guess I would say not so much to fit in, but maybe to be respectful. Right.
And also to navigate the terrain. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I was going back to Philadelphia and going to, a football game with my buddies, you'd probably look at us and think we were like the loud, obnoxious Americans, because we probably are, because we're in America, we're going to a football game and we're like, woo.
Yeah.
But, if I was going to a soccer game with some people I just met at a hostel in a country where the culture doesn't really want you to be the loud, obnoxious American, you're probably going to adjust your behavior a bit, you know? Is that not, I wouldn't say that that's not about not being true to who you are. I think it's more about just being respectful of where you are and understanding that, you know, you have to modify your behavior sometimes in different places to try to, you know, be a part of that culture and respect the culture and the people there. And that's a part of traveling, I think. So so the answer is, I guess, you're still the core of who you are and you're yourself, but you might make some adjustments to be a part of the culture and be respectful of that.
Yeah, I love that,
Makes
bro.
sense.
Yeah, thank you for going there with me because I find there's so many dimensions that open up of us, and I think that's what you mean by respecting the culture. It's like you just find a new dimension of yourself, sort of going, oh, I'll respect this version, and I'll respect this, you know. And I noticed this for me starkly is like, because Brazil is is one of me and my wife. We were going there every February until COVID hit, and then we sort of just paused, press pause on that. But there's this really interesting thing where I had this realization traveling around Brazil where it's like, I think this is the Indian Amrit and not the Australian Amrit that's shown up here. It's like, wait, there's an Indian Amrit and there's an Australian Amrit, and it's like, wait, what is going on? And it's like, man, it's like different cultures, different mentality, and it's like you said, still at the core, it's still you, but like you show up with like this different mentality. It's like, it's weird to describe, but yeah, thank you. You did amazing in answering that.
Really, I mean, I think anybody that's, you know, you have different sets of friends at home and things like that. And there's probably, you know, and sometimes you might sit down with the friend who's, you know, a little more serious and maybe the conversation's, you know, always a little bit more deep and you're not consciously maybe adjusting your behavior, but you just maybe become more the deep sort of subdued you. And then you go out with your drinking friends and you're like the wild you know, I mean, we contain multitudes, right? Yeah. So that doesn't change when you travel.
I love that. So Oslo, what happened? How come? Tell me a little bit more. Why Oslo?
Well, I met a Norwegian girl in Brazil. And actually,
and if not now, then when?
Yeah, something like that. No, we had met in a hostel, and then it's a long story, but you know, 4 years later, we reconnected and started chatting, and then we started deciding. Well, we decided that maybe we should meet up, because how often are we gonna, you know, chat from Colorado to where I was living at the time to Norway and just kind of have this phone Skype thing going on. We should probably meet up and see if this is still a thing. And so we went up in New York City and we were like, well, this is a thing. And then we started dating and blah, blah, blah. Now we're married and we have 2 small kids, and I live in Oslo, Norway. And I just got my citizenship here a couple months ago. So that's
congratulations. Really cool. Citizen of Norway. Yeah, beautiful. And congrats on the 2 little ones, man. That is such a blessing.
Thanks.
So
do you have any kids or?
Yeah, I've got a little 5-month-old. So this is me jacked up on lack of sleep.
Yeah, congratulations. It's wild, huh? It's a wild ride.
Man, it's a whole journey. It's a whole journey. Talk about adventures. That is an adventure every day.
How has the adjustment been for you from the life of no kid? I think that's one of the biggest adjustments you can make in life, from the kidless life to the kid life, you know.
Yeah, totally. It's different. It's interesting because it's very hard to describe to someone that doesn't have it, as I know you've probably can attest to as well. Some part of you grows so fast, so rapidly in responsibility that it's ridiculous. You can literally feel yourself in emotional maturity just kind of going, whoa. But then there's other part of me that's kind of gone, like, it's connected to this whole new childlike creativity and behavior, which is just like, it's the juxtaposition of those 2 things is really remarkable. And it's like everyone will say this, but it's just really special when you can look into like the eyes of a baby and you just see yourself kind of looking back and your wife looking back in it, and you're just like, what? Me and my wife are just like, nah, man, like, no, wake up. And she's like, yeah, wake up. And it's like, this came out of your belly. Like, what is going? So we're still like acclimatizing on the miracle of nature and how biology came. So there's been a lot of late night phone calls to my own mother going, I'm sorry I'm such an asshole to you. I'm watching my wife put in the work with my son, and I'm like, man, like mothers are just next level. So
Yeah, man.
but yeah, man,
How
it's
has it changed your relationship to your work at all? Or
yeah, big
your
time. Yeah, big
in
time,
what
man.
ways?
It's before my work was it was a great curiosity and it was fun and it was easy to explore. And I don't want to say I was one foot in and one foot out, but there was always an opportunity to sort of explore something else. Like there was that curiosity that was very ripe in me. Whereas it's interesting because you mentioned the word commitment, and I wrote that down actually. There's just a level of commitment that comes through when it's like actually what I'm up to in life is actually helping put a roof over my son's head. You know, it's there's just that level of commitment which makes it like, and it's not like a like commitment previously would have been a bit more like a like a weighty kind of energy, but this is like a commitment
Yeah.
where it's like a let's go and see like what let's really make the most of this. So it's kind of pushed me with that responsibility to that commitment a little bit deeper. Yourself, how's it been for you with
Yeah. I
regards
mean,
to
I think
work
it
since kids?
was, I know for a lot of people, the whole working from home or the Zoom calls and things like that was relatively new for the pandemic. But for me, I'd been doing it for 8 years now,
Long, yeah.
So,
And the
well,
podcast
actually
set you up
10
so well for
years.
that as well, right? Like the podcast setup is the Zoom setup. You're off. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, anybody that's had the experience now, I think we've all had the experience of working from home now. Like before, maybe I was more in the minority of working
Mm.
remotely from cafes and from home and, all this stuff. But, with that comes this balance of it's easy to kind of slip into the workaholism, right? It's
Mhm.
like you can always get online. There's always more to do. It's always there. And I think for a long time, my work I just was just so into it, doing it all
Mhm.
the time. And then when my daughter was born, I was just kind of like, yes, it's important, and I want to make an impact, and it's still important to me. But it's not. It doesn't have to be everything, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. It opens up a whole family. It's interesting how it becomes this front and center piece. And it's weird. Like, I don't know if you were the same, but like my parents were always harping on about how important family is. And I was just like, yeah, of course you're going to say that your parents. And now it's like, oh shit, family's really important. And it's like, damn it, I'm a
Well,
parent
well, I
now.
mean, think about it, man. When you just don't. I mean, at least, yeah. I mean, when you were single or when you were just traveling with your wife, your girlfriend, or whoever,
Yeah.
families are like invisible.
Yeah.
You almost don't even see them on the street. You're just like, they're just completely discounted.
Yeah.
And then, you're just not in that mode at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
It's just not the part of life you're in. And then you have a family, and then you just see families everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah. It's a
And then you
total thing.
realize you're invisible to those, 20 somethings who are on their way out to the club or whatever. And,
Yeah.
it's
It's
just the nature of life, I
it's so
guess.
interesting, isn't it? Man, I want to
Yeah.
talk about we were talking about fear a little bit earlier, and we are talking about work and kids and family. The the opportunity to basically go on the journey of living a location independent career. Yeah, like now it's something that's way more in the collective consciousness. Like people are sort of, yeah, like laptop lifestyle is a phrase that everybody has like in their mind somewhere tucked away. But this has been a thing you've been dedicated to quite some time. And not only that, now you're actually helping people, yeah, like be location independent through the community, the Lifestyle Launch Academy. What were like at what point and kind of what were your fears in terms of like at some point you would have been like, I'm doing this for myself and I'm having lots of fun. But then at what point was it like, actually, this is a service that I need to offer a tribe and a community? Was it off the back of the podcast, or were you having friends that were inquiring from you how you were doing it? A multitude. Can you explain to us the journey of how this all sort of came about?
Oh yeah. Well, it's a few different things. I'd say
Hmm.
one with the podcast and Zero to Travel, it's about helping people build a life of travel. Essentially, it's people that love travel and want to make it a big thing in their lives, whether that means they're doing it full time or they have a home base and they just, it's one of their number one hobbies, and they just want to build it in and do it a lot. And
Mhm.
generally, people that love travel, it's not like it doesn't seem to be if you want to call it a hobby or a thing that you're interested in. it doesn't seem to be the kind of thing where it's like a fad where you're, 1 week, it's like, oh, I might buy a guitar and pick it up. And then, a couple weeks later, I'm like, I don't really want to play guitar.
Yeah.
It's
I'm a
like
traveler
certain
this week,
things.
next week. Nah, I don't really want to travel.
Yeah. It's like, if you love travel, you're kind of like,
obsessed.
you kind of love it your whole life. You kind of love it your whole life. Right.
Yeah.
It's just the thing. So, because of that, it, like anybody's life, you go through a lot of changes. Like you have a kid now, there's a lot of things that happen. So the way you build travel into your life can change. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. And I've experienced a lot of some of those different ways. Like, so for me in the beginning, I had bills to pay. I ended up in these touring jobs, and that was an awesome time in my life because I got to travel around. I was working as a contractor, but I was learning. I was making money. I was living on the road. I was having all my bills paid for me. But at some point, I wanted to have my own kind of thing. I knew I always wanted to have that. I just didn't know what it was. And then I heard the term location independent, and I was like the fireworks were going off, the big light bulb, like location independent. That's the kind of business I need to have. And then that was a whole other exploration. Right. And then finally kind of figuring that out, and then understanding, hey, this is amazing, but there's like, how do I meet other people doing this? Right. And so that was the genesis of the community, because we were, it goes back to the whole, for entrepreneurs, sometimes the business idea is just scratching your own itch, right? You're creating the thing that you wish existed. So you're like, well, this doesn't really exist, or
Inspired
it doesn't
evolution.
exist the way I want it.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So I'm just going to make it. And, hopefully people understand the intention and show up and things like that.
Something similar.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So in there, I'm going to sort of try and draw two parallels between two things we've been talking about. Do you think being an adventurer at heart and having traveled so many places was a useful sort of temperament, personality trait, I don't know, chops that you developed in said space helped you with your being a business owner and trying to actually create something material from, because a lot of businesses taking something that's an idea and implementing it into the world, there's an adventure in that as well. Do you think the adventure of having been a traveler around the world has actually helped on that path as well, or am I drawing parallels where they don't exist?
No, I think it has. I think in the beginning, it's interesting because if you looked at my life touring and not having a full-time job and going contract to contract, traveling overseas, taking months off, and living this unconventional life and lifestyle, who knew, I always say this, but it's funny, like who knew being nomadic for 10 years would actually have value to people later on in life? I didn't know. People just thought I was, my dad would be like, hey, when are you going to settle down, man? This is like, how long are you going to do this thing? And, all those types of questions. I didn't know that it would turn into something that, oh, there are other people that want to do this too. And there are other people like me that want to make this their life, or at least, I get a lot of joy in helping them now because I lived that nomadic life. I might do it again someday. I'm just not in a position where I want to do it right now with my family. I'm like cool living in Norway and raising my kids and having, I still love traveling, of course, but I'm not in the place where I want to be nomadic right now. But for those people that are, I've done it and I want to help them. I want them to have that. So as far as the parallel, I think in the beginning, the perception might be that I was living this sort of risky life. To me, it just felt like I was following my heart, and I understood what people were saying because I am a part of that culture. So I, sometimes you would, halfway into my touring career or whatever, might be like, should I take this contract? Like, should I be working a full-time job in the office and like building a career? Because I can't really go higher than tour manager on the road. That's sort of the highest position on the event tours that I was running. But I was like, no, I'm just going to keep doing this. So that might've seemed risky to people. So you would think that when I was going to start my own thing, well, I'm just like used to taking on risk, but in actuality, it felt risky and scary in a different way. Right. Well, first of all, to be an entrepreneur, you have to put yourself out there in a certain way. You have to have a lot of faith in yourself to come up with the ideas and to like figure things out. And there's a lot of failing along the way. And just, it's not a linear kind of thing. You're sort of all over the place, and it's hard. So, so in many ways, I don't think taking the quote unquote risks by, living a life of travel and shunning the status quo helped me that much when I started, because I was still scared and trying to figure it out and having to overcome imposter syndrome and all the other typical entrepreneurial things, which you still battle to this day. But on the other hand, it has helped me because through traveling and all the experiences I've had, you realize that you're a resourceful person who can get a lot of things done, even if you don't think you can. I didn't know I could change a transmission in a lawn tractor until I figured that out, or, get a double-decker British bus that's stuck on the side of the road in the middle of Kansas fixed, by a mechanic who doesn't never seen a double-decker, all these things, I could go on and on, but you face a lot of things in your career, and you can use that that empowerment that you have through your resourcefulness from traveling. And you can apply that, of course, to entrepreneurship. And then there's a lot of other things that I learned from traveling. I think that, maybe it's confidence and, dealing with different types of people. And yes, a lot of it translates. So the answer, again, going back to the duality, it's both.
Yeah.
The answer is both.
I love that. And I asked that from an intimate space because having been to 56 countries, my mum was always like, you wasted so much money and time, like you could have bought a house and all this sort of stuff, And my dad was always very supportive. He was like, actually, no, these lessons that you're learning right now are invaluable. Like, there are experiences that you're gathering that just, like you cannot put a price on those experiences, because life is, one life is what you're conscious of, and then, potentially those will be your memories. So it's always had that juxtaposition, and hence why I asked. And in that, I wanted to, just ask, like, you mentioned something about following your heart, and from the outside looking in, there's a lot of success in your space. Did you believe deep down inside that potentially just following your heart would have led to your success? Or was it something that was always sort of like, I don't know where this is really going, and it just happened to turn into success? Can you speak to a little bit about your faith and what your beliefs were around that?
You might be surprised that the answer is both.
I'm going to call this podcast Duality, or the Adventure of Duality.
There you go. Great title. Yeah, well, it's always a good idea to reflect on your experiences and see what has worked, even if the path you have ahead of you, you sometimes might not even believe in yourself, right? So getting into, say, entrepreneurship, right? Of course it's unknown. Of course you don't know if you're going to make it work, or what exactly you're doing, and where it's going to lead, and what you're going to start, and if people are going to buy it, and on and on and on. But what I could do was look back on my, Nomad days and say, well, look, every time that I followed my heart, which is what I was doing, when all was said and done, I just wanted to keep traveling. And so I just kept saying yes to travel in those different forms, whatever that meant, because it's just what I wanted to do. And it was a wonderful life. So why don't I just lean into that idea that, hey, well, this worked for me before, so maybe I can trust that it will work again.
Would you advise others to follow their heart?
Yeah. I mean, how could you say no to that? Right? There's a lot to that, of course. When I say that, it doesn't mean don't be practical at all. Don't think things through and have considerations. But when all's said and done, following your heart is going to be the best thing for you to do, because when you are sitting on your deathbed, you're probably not going to regret following your heart.
Yeah, I love that. Agreed. Jason, before I let you go, there's a question that I ask everybody, which is, inspired evolution, what do you sort of see for the future that lies ahead of us for tomorrow, for yourself, potentially for humanity, potentially for travelers all over the world, potentially for the planet? Like when you feel into inspired evolution and what's possible for tomorrow as a collective, what do you have a vision? Do you feel into something? What rings true for you?
Hold on. Let me get out my crystal ball.
You don't have to get it right, bro.
No.
It's just what you feel.
I think the world is a lot more unpredictable and chaotic than we really think it is as individuals. It's look at the pandemic and things like that. We don't have to talk about that because everybody's tired of hearing that, but it's very difficult to know because human behavior as a collective is unpredictable. But when I think back to traveling and some of the things we talked about earlier, where in the end, people are good. There have been so many times, strangers have helped me out or taken me in and things like that. And when you really understand that, there's a lot of good out there. So you have to think that as a collective, we'll figure some of these challenges out, hopefully all of them together. And just having that direct experience of getting those interactions and finding those good people all over the world. It's something that I carry with me when you read the bad media and, you hear the stories and all the terrible things that happen in this world. So yeah, it's a balance. I've been struggling with this a lot lately with the idea of, I think we have to be more conscious travelers for sure. It's hard to promote travel and to think, well, I know that travel has an impact, of course, on local communities. It has an impact on, the environment. If you're, taking planes and all those things, I do think in the end, you travel, it opens people up and it gets us more connected to the world. Yeah. So I think in the end, there's a lot of good that comes out of that you can't even quantify. So I still think I still feel, excited and at peace with, promoting travel as a thing, especially in the way I like to talk about it. There's a lot of good change in the world that can come from travel, but we should also, as individuals, just be conscious of the traveling we're doing. And it doesn't mean we have to be saints or we should never get on a plane or anything like that, but it's just to be conscious of it and try to leave a place better than when we came and all of those types of things. So
love that, brother. Thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly in this conversation on this early start for you over there. And I know we went to lots of different places, and I know a lot of it's informed through your own adventures in life and your own podcast and all the conversations you've gleaned your wisdom from. And
well,
honestly,
it sounds like we're going to have to get you on the podcast. We got some travel stories to share, so we'll have to make that happen.
It would be my honor. It would be my absolute honor. But yeah. Oh, and yeah, man, thank you so much for doing this and sharing yourself. And, honestly, just from one traveler to another, it's really nice to just sort of drop in immediately and just not like, you just see the walls just kind of drop and just connect. Like it's just so easy. And I really appreciate that about your vibe. And yeah, just thank you so much for doing this on behalf of myself and the Inspired Evolution audience, brother. Just wishing you all the best on your path. And we'll put links and stuff to your show notes, in the show notes to your podcast, and the community as well. So hopefully everybody that wants to check out Zero to Travel, please, it's in the show notes. Do yourself a favor. The podcast are heaps of fun. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's an honor to be invited on here and really enjoy chatting with you. So let's get you on the show so we can turn the tables and we'll figure out a time to do that. So be on the lookout.
Flip the script.
And I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, brother. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment. And if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.